very uncharted territory. I think that's something that everyone can agree upon. What will fall semester look like for WSU and Pullman?
Yeah, we're currently working on what those details are going to look like. We felt the first thing that we had to do was tell Coug families, our current students, faculty, and staff, first off, that we are planning to be in person in the fall on all of our campuses. And I think before you can start developing a plan, sometimes you have to put a marker down and say, okay, this is what we're going to work toward. Now let's work our way towards that. So will the fall semester look like fall of 2019? Absolutely not. We fully expect students, faculty, and staff will have a testing program of some nature put in place. People will have to have some sort of cloth mask on. Social distancing will be part of our classroom environment for residence halls. Dining will look certainly different, where people aren't going to see the buffet lines anymore. We'll have to modify some of those things. But what we've heard from families and parents, students, incoming students, is that people do value that in-person ability to interact as part of the educational experience. And I think if we learned nothing else over the last few weeks, it's been that we can do content delivery with technology. And I think people go, hey, that's great, but it's not the same. And I think that's what we want to try and do is keep our faculty, staff, and students safe, but also bring back some of that in-person aspects to education that people have just felt that they were missing over the last few weeks.
Can you give us an idea of what some changes might look like for those classes that can meet in person? Or I'm assuming we're talking about seated away from each other, maybe small groups. Can you explain
Yes.
what conversations are happening in those terms?
Yeah, we've got a group of faculty working on, what some of this could look like. And so I think there's a couple things that's starting to emerge. The idea this fall of a big 500-person class where everybody's kind of jammed in shoulder to shoulder, I just don't think we're going to see those types of classes offered in that particular traditional format. What we're hearing people think about is what we call a flipped classroom, where maybe some of the lecture material is done via technology, but you have smaller in-person sections that would meet at different times, where you take that 200-person classroom and we would only put 30 people in there and mandate social distancing, but you'd have that personalized interaction with a faculty member or with your student colleagues. Laboratory sections, for example, that maybe we'd have 2 people to a workstation or that type of thing. Now we may have to split those in half or a third and schedule additional laboratory times where people can come in and do the hands-on work, but maybe have that social distancing as part of that class. I think we're going to see people use more time slots during the day. Everybody wants to take classes between 10 and 2, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. There are other times in the calendar that we can do that. So I think you're going to see a lot of flexibility, a lot of hybrid use of technology plus in-person. And there's some things like our fine arts classes, some of our music classes and things where those are kind of one-on-one, one-on-two types of instructional things that are very difficult to replicate through the use of technology. And we want to make sure that we find safe ways to do those things. So I think the classroom will feel a little bit different, but we also have found prior to COVID-19, a large percentage of our students would take an online class per term and complement that with 3 or 4 in-person classes because of time flexibility and things like that. So people are already used to a little bit of a hybrid format on things, and I think it'll still be that type of interaction, use of technology plus in-person, but with adequate social distancing, I think is what people will see in the fall.
Yeah, and I was reading your letter that you wrote last week also. While other institutions may choose to do more of an online format, it doesn't sound like that's what you want to do at WSU. Is it a priority for you to have students back in the classroom safely?
Absolutely. And we have some of the smartest people in the United States, the WSU faculty that work in this space. And we engaged them to say, let's not talk about if, let's talk about how. And I think it was important for leadership to say, this is our goal, this is our objective. We want to do that while keeping safety in mind, but let's not argue what the end point ought to be. Let's argue about how to get there well. So absolutely, we made a strategic decision that we want that in-person experience to be part of our fall term. And let's figure out how to get there and do it in a way that families are going to feel safe, our students are going to feel safe. And so often we worry about students. Remember, we got faculty and staff that also may be a vulnerable age group, might have a particular affinity for COVID-19. So what we've also got to do is ensure our faculty and staff are also in a safe working environment as well. So it's all three of those groups. How do we do it in a good, collaborative, safe way? And I think we're going to come up with some good solutions.
I want to transition now to campus living, because Pullman, I think, it's got to be one of the last true college towns in America. It's very unique in that sense. I mean, so how will the university accommodate students living in residence halls and fraternity and sorority houses? What conversations are happening in those departments?
Yeah, I think if I look upon it, it's really almost a three-step process. I think the first step was to really think about the classroom environment and that educational environment, what that would look like. Step two is really looking at the residence halls, Greek houses, things like that. Do you have to have, how many people can you put per room? What kind of testing program can we have in place? How could we handle if somebody has a positive test in terms of a quarantine or an area that's pretty seamless and easy for people to get to? And so that's what we're really intensively planning right now. And we hope within the next week or so to release some ideas to say, okay, this is the plan that we currently have in place on how to handle the residence halls and those types of things. The third part is things like the student union, the student rec center. How do you handle the informal gatherings of 30 to 35 students for a club or a party or some particular event that people go to that's just part of being in a college community? And that's the one that I think in the long run may be the hardest one to deal with, because you can't be Big Brother. We're not going to be able to watch everything that everybody does, nor is that appropriate. But some personal responsibility is going to have to also be part of it. Is if we mandate some sort of facial covering and you mandate social distancing, peer pressure here can help as much as anything, as somebody saying, hey, if we're going to get together, we gotta remember the way we're supposed to do this. So that's the third part. And I think families, Cougs, alumni ought to expect to see kind of regular communications every couple weeks on our approach to solving this, how we're going to do it, what costs will be associated with that. Because that by the time August rolls around, I want people going, okay, I know how gatherings are going to be handled. I feel confident that they'll be safe and that there's adequate medical services if something's needed. There's a testing protocol and program in place. We have contact tracing as part of what we do on campus. And that the classroom and residence hall environment has been well thought out, and that's going to have a good Coug experience, but it's going to be a little bit different than it might have been in the past. So we're right in the middle of that process, and we're just going to keep at it, but we'll keep communications open.
We asked people to send in some questions. One of the things that we got quite frequently was about single rooms in residence halls. Would that be something that the school would consider, or is that even feasible in such a large institution?
Yeah, and that's part of what our protocols could look like in the dorms and residence halls. And I will tell you right now, that is an active conversation. And the question is, can you put two in a room and still be safe? And should you just go to single rooms? Economically, is that viable to keep a residence hall open with people just in single rooms? Those types of questions. So I don't have a specific answer to that now, but I will say that is something that we're working on. And if I'm a family and I'm thinking about sending my son or daughter, grandson or granddaughter off to school, and you say, well, we're going to put 4 people in a room, I'd be pretty skeptical about how you're going to do that and keep everybody safe. So those protocols will be really, really important, that people understand exactly how we're going to handle those and what the room loads are going to look like. And we'll get that information out probably in the next month.
Great. I want to shift gears now really quick. Can you talk about enrollment? For the last several years, the university has really had record enrollment every single year. It seems like almost for the last decade, even. How has that changed because of the pandemic?
Well, it's interesting. Our summer school enrollment right now, largest we've ever had in university history. And if you go back even 4 weeks ago, everybody was predicting, summer school was going to tank, the fall enrollment wasn't going to be there. And so when we did some survey work, if you go back 6 weeks, a lot of people were talking about, well, I think I'll put off, take a year off, I'll go work for a while. And then about a month later, when that same survey was done, a lot more people said, well, in the midst of an economic downturn, education is going to be important. I need to find a way to do that. There's a value in a safe residential education. So right now, we still have the same enrollment target that we had earlier this year at about 4,200 incoming freshmen on the Pullman campus, and every other campus has got their own target. And we're still seeing a pretty strong, especially Washington-based student acceptance rate. We'll know more June 1. We pushed our sort of deposit date from May 1st to June 1st, so we'll know a lot more then. But we feel pretty confident in our Washington resident population. Where I think we're going to see some challenges will be international students. And it's not because people don't want to come, it's because they may not be able to get visas to come and those types of things. So our international student population in Pullman is not large, but at the same time, 7-8% of our student body, if all of a sudden that goes to a really much smaller number, that's going to have an effect. And it's just completely unknown what out of state's going to look like. With the Cal State system electing to go online, it could be more people say, I'm just going to stay at home from Northern California and do that. It could also be a boon for us because they say, well, I wanted that in-person experience, and if I can get that at Washington State and I can't get that at home, that makes WSU more desirable. So we just don't know what that's going to look like. But I expect our enrollment to be strong going into the fall. And I know from talking to my colleagues at University of Washington, I think they're also expecting a pretty robust incoming class.
How has the pandemic impacted the university financially? Has it put a strain on the system?
Yes, many viewers will know that we refunded people's room and board for those folks after spring break. And just a reminder, we're a semester school, so we had completed 9 weeks of in-person instruction prior to spring break. So there was only 6 weeks left at the end. And so if families requested it, we refunded on a prorated basis that 6 weeks of room and board, and that was really an important thing to do for us. But that was probably a $10 to $12 million hit to the university, and it was the right thing to do, is appropriate thing to do. But it does have financial consequences because those dollars employ students, they employ staff in the residence halls, the dining areas, things like that. So those do have a long-term impact. We also just recently saw the state of Washington has given us a target fiscal reduction for next year that's on the order of 15% of the dollars that we get from the state. So that is going to have some major fiscal impacts, and we just got that number yesterday. So we just don't currently have what our plan is going to be yet, but we'll have that in time by June 1st. So it's going to be like the recession in terms of declining state support and things like that. And so we're going to have to tighten our belts. We're going to have to look really carefully at everything that we do. And there's going to be some things that we're doing now that we're going to have to stop doing because we're just not going to be able to afford to do that. But we want to make sure that we keep student success paramount and that we don't eliminate programs and things like that that are important for student success. And we learned a lot of that in the last recession, that if you're not careful, you cut out a bunch of these programs. At the end of the day, you've compromised your ability for students to move through in 4 years, 5 years, get that degree program because you don't have enough instructors or you don't have academic advisors you need or support staff. So we're going to have to we want to learn our lessons from that, make sure we preserve as many people as possible that interact with the student experience. And probably ultimately, at the end of the day, administration in those areas will be more highly impacted than our teaching mission, and that's the way it should be.
So that the tightening of the budget, does that mean at this time we don't know about any layoffs or anything like that?
Not yet.
Oh,
We'll announce, how we're going to handle it, what we're going to do. Uh, we have to provide some stuff back to the state of Washington by June 1. So clearly we'll be putting out information prior to that time. And we anticipated there was going to be some challenges. So we put a hiring freeze in place and froze administrative salaries. Our football coaches, myself and others, took some salary cuts. We did some things early on, but those were maybe the obvious things that you would expect to do without knowing what that fiscal target's going to be. Now that we sort of have an idea what that looks like, we'll get much more specific on how we're going to meet that goal. And our leadership team's working on it now.
and now one of my last questions, I want to ask you about WSU football. I mean, come on, fall in Pullman, that's what people want to look forward to. Have you had conversations with the athletic department or new head coach about what football might look like in the fall?
Yeah, that's an active dialogue and discussion that we're having, not just internally, but with the Pac-12. And interestingly, virtually every phone call I do with presidents, whether it's in the state, on the West Coast, nationally, intercollegiate athletics, and what that's going to look like continues to come up. I believe we're going to play football this fall. Whether it's going to be in front of a full stadium, those kind of things, I don't know. I don't think anybody knows yet. The professional sports franchises, for example, Major League Baseball and some others, are working on, sort of midsummer kind of startup. So we're going to have an opportunity to see what some of the other sports organizations nationally elect to try and do. And many people have seen, baseball in Korea and other places where it's not in front of, fans. There may be lots of options like that we'll want to look at. However, I will say with some confidence that I think really hard to have the tailgating experience, full stadium, those types of things probably in August and September. That seems like a bit of a stretch, but I think football is going to be there. Coach, we can ensure the players will be safe. We can ensure the coaching staffs will be safe. The real question to me isn't the players and the coaching staffs at this point. It's what do we do for the fans and people like that? Will people go into a stadium and say you went into Martin Stadium and said you can only let a fourth of the people in and you got a social distance? Would people actually do that or not? There's some things like that I think we'll have to wait and see how that turns out. But I'm excited for Coach Rolovich. I'm excited for our team for the fall. And I think, to be honest, we've all been cooped up at home. And if we can find a safe way for our student athletes and coaching staff to be able to do that, I think we're all going to be eager to watch college athletics unfold this fall.
Great. Yeah, a final thought. Do you have any final words for families watching tonight, current or future families? Anything you would like to say to them?
Yeah, absolutely. I know so many families are concerned about, can they afford to go to WSU? Can they afford to go to college? And one of the things that the president of University of Washington and I talk about a lot is please apply. If you apply, you can sit down with our financial aid folks and we can work with families to come up with ways to make sure that you have an affordable college experience. And so often people don't do that step because they read somewhere and they go, I can never do it. So the one thing is apply, let us work with you, and we'll come up with a way that fits you, your family, your career goals, and the financial part. And that's an important part of what we're paid to do is create educational opportunities for Washington families.
Great. Is there anything else you want to say, Mr. Schulz? I think we covered a lot of ground.
No, I appreciate the time, and go Cougs.